I spent most of my life believing that nothing truly surprising ever happens to a man like me. A truck driver, a single father, someone who learned to swallow disappointment the way others swallow air. But on that Christmas night, when I was just a shadow crossing an endless frozen highway, I learned how wrong I was. Sometimes life waits until we are at our lowest, our most tired, our most forgotten, to show us that the impossible can knock on our door without warning. And in my case, it didn't knock. It crashed into my headlights. I remember the moment perfectly. The road was empty, the snow falling and slow, heavy flakes that blurred the world like a memory we try not to revisit. My hands were numb on the steering wheel, not from the cold outside, but from the cold inside, the kind that comes from missing someone you love more than your own breath. My daughter, Lily. Every mile I drove that night felt like another step away from her Christmas, another reminder of how much I had failed to protect the small family we once were. Then it happened, in one flash of trembling headlights on the shoulder ahead. A luxury car twisted near the ditch, its engine barely alive, its windows fogged from the inside. Something in me froze, not the cold, but the certainty that whoever was inside needed help right now. And as strange as it sounds, I felt it before I saw it, a presence, a desperation, like a whisper reaching through the storm asking me not to keep driving. What I found inside that car should never have been on that road alone. A woman, unconscious, skin turning pale from the cold, breath fading fast. I didn't know her name. I didn't know the world would soon recognize her face. I only knew that if I didn't act, she wouldn't see another Christmas. I pulled her out, wrapped her against the warmth of my jacket, and when her breathing slipped into silence, I did the unthinkable. I pressed my mouth to hers and fought to bring her back. Not because I was a hero, but because something inside me refused to let another life disappear in front of me. When her eyes finally opened, confused and frightened, I felt something shift in the air, like fate exhaling. I didn't know yet that she was a billionaire. I didn't know that her family had made decisions that once shattered my own life. And I definitely didn't know that this night, our night, held a secret that would force both of us to face a truth we spent years running from. Before we go deeper into what happened after that first impossible moment, I want to know something from you. Where are you listening to this story from right now? Which place in the world is sharing this Christmas night with me? And if you want to stay beside me through every twist of this journey, don't forget to subscribe. Trust me, what happened next changed everything. I don't think I'll ever forget the smell of diesel mixed with cold pine drifting through the cracked window of my truck that Christmas Eve. It was the kind of smell that clings to you, settles into your clothes, and becomes part of who you are. For some men, Christmas carries music, family, warm tables filled with food. For me, it carried the hum of an engine that never stopped asking something from me, mile after mile. I kept my hands firm on the steering wheel, watching the white lines blur beneath the headlights, each one reminding me of a promise I once made to myself, a promise I no longer believed I had the strength to keep. The promise that one day I'd give my daughter a Christmas worth remembering. Lily, she would be opening gifts at her grandmother's house by now, probably wrapped in one of those soft blankets with cartoon animals she loves so much. I pictured her small hands tearing colored paper, her eyes lighting up, her smile bright enough to warm any winter. But I wasn't there to see it. I told myself that work came first, that bills didn't wait, that a father did what he needed to do. But deep inside I knew the truth: Christmas hurt too much. It was easier to keep driving than to sit at a table where the chair next to me remained empty, where the silence around my plate reminded me of everything I had lost. The highway that night felt endless, stretching across frozen fields and forests that looked like they belonged to another world. Snowflakes drifted like tiny ghosts, tapping gently against the windshield before melting away, disappearing as fast as hope sometimes does. The heater rattled, trying its best to fight the cold seeping into the cabin. My fingers tightened around the wheel as another memory surfaced, one from a Christmas years ago, when Lily was just a toddler and her mother still smiled at me without disappointment in her eyes. We had decorated a small tree in our old apartment. I remember lifting Lily so she could place the last ornament at the top. She giggled, her hands tiny and trembling from excitement. Her mother kissed me softly on the cheek, whispering that we would have many more Christmases like that. I believed her. I believed everything back then. But promises, like ornaments, are fragile. And some things fall no matter how carefully you place them. A trucker learns early that thinking too much can be dangerous, especially at night. The road listens to your thoughts, turns them into shadows that sit beside you. So I tried to push them away, focusing on the rhythm of the tires, on the faint sound of the radio playing Christmas songs that felt too gentle for a world so cold. I took a sip of the lukewarm coffee in my thermos, grimacing at the bitter taste. At least bitterness was familiar. Hours passed. The sky darkened even more, the snow thickening as if the world wanted to hide itself beneath a blanket no one asked for. I checked the dashboard clock. Almost 9. Somewhere out there, families were gathering around fireplaces, sharing stories, laughing. And I was counting down the miles to an empty motel room where I would pretend that sleep was enough to replace love. Then something changed. It started as a flicker, barely noticeable, a trembling light on the side of the highway far ahead. I leaned forward, squinting, thinking maybe it was a reflection or a trick of the snow. But as my truck rolled closer, the light grew brighter, more distorted, like it was struggling to stay alive. My chest tightened. The road was too isolated, too deserted for anyone to be stopped out there voluntarily. I slowed down, the tires crunching over fresh snow. The shape became clearer, a sleek luxury car, angled dangerously near the ditch, one headlight blinking in rapid, uneven flashes. It looked out of place on that forgotten stretch of road, like a diamond dropped in the mud. My heart thudded in a way that didn't feel normal. Something wasn't right. For a moment, I considered driving past. People today are unpredictable. Stopping for strangers isn't always wise. But then another thought hit me, what if someone inside needed help? What if someone was freezing, trapped, or worse? I remembered the time my own engine died in the middle of nowhere and how helpless I felt, wishing someone would stop. No one did. I pulled over. The truck's brakes hissed as I shifted into neutral, and the cold slapped my face the second I opened the door. The wind cut through my jacket like knives made of ice. I trudged toward the car, snow swallowing my boots with each step. The closer I got, the more I felt that strange pressure in my chest, a sensation I hadn't felt in years, like fate was holding its breath. I reached the driver's side window and wiped away the frost with my sleeve. My heart stopped. A woman was inside. Motionless. Her head tilted against the seat, her lips pale, her breathing so faint I could barely see her chest move. Panic shot through me like lightning. I tried the door. Locked. I banged on the glass, shouting, but she didn't stir. The freezing air bit into my skin as I stepped back, scanning the frame for anything I could use. I found a rock buried in the snow. With one hard swing, the glass shattered, shards falling like glitter over the seat and her coat. I reached in, unlatched the lock, and pulled the door open. A blast of cold air rushed out. She didn't respond. I lifted her carefully, feeling how cold her body was, how fragile she felt in my arms. Too cold. Too still. Something deep inside me whispered that I was already too late. But another part of me, a part one thought had died long ago, refused to believe that. I carried her toward my truck, fighting the wind, fighting the fear that pressed against my ribs. I didn't know her name. I didn't know her story. All I knew was that destiny had placed her in my path on the longest night of my life. And something inside me sensed that this moment, this choice, would change everything. Because no one appears on a lonely road on Christmas night by accident. And no life crosses yours without a reason. When I settled her inside the cabin of my truck, the warmth from the heater wrapped around us like a weak embrace trying its best to save a life. She was still unconscious, her skin cold in a way that frightened me more than any storm ever had. I had seen people freeze on the road before. I knew how quickly the cold steals everything. I pulled my jacket tighter around her shoulders, rubbing her arms gently, trying to bring some color back into her cheeks. Her breathing was shallow, almost hesitant, as if her lungs were unsure whether they should keep trying. For a moment, I sat there staring at her, wondering who she was. Everything about her looked expensive, the fabric of her coat, the delicate watch on her wrist, the faint scent of a perfume that didn't belong anywhere near a truck cabin or a deserted highway. She wasn't from my world. Not even close. But death doesn't care about bank accounts, and neither do cold winds. That thought kept echoing in my mind as I watched the steam from my own breath mingle with hers in the dim light of the dashboard. She didn't wake up quickly. Her head leaned slightly to the side, dark hair falling like a curtain over her face. I brushed it away carefully, more out of instinct than courage, and felt the warmth creeping slowly back into her skin. Minutes passed. The storm outside grew heavier, tapping the windows with the same rhythm as a heart that refuses to let go. I listened to that rhythm and prayed, in a quiet way I hadn't prayed in years, for her to open her eyes. When she finally stirred, it was as fragile as the flutter of a leaf. Her eyelashes trembled first, then her fingers curled slightly around the sleeve of my jacket. Her lips parted, trying to form a sound, but only a weak breath escaped. I leaned closer, speaking softly, trying not to startle her. I told her she was safe, that she wasn't alone, that the cold hadn't won. She blinked slowly, her eyes adjusting to the dim orange glow from the heater vents. There was confusion there, fear too, but also something else, something like disbelief. She tried to speak again, and her voice came out rough, broken by cold and exhaustion. I could barely hear the words, but it sounded like she asked what happened. I explained in the simplest way possible. She was on the verge of passing out, maybe worse, and I found her just in time. Her gaze dropped for a moment, as if she was trying to piece together the fragments of the night. I saw the way her fingers shook. Not just from cold. Something inside her was trembling too. I reached for the thermos and offered her warm water. She accepted with both hands, though her grip was weak. When she touched my fingers by accident, she flinched, not in fear of me, but in surprise at the warmth. It made me realize how close she had come to never waking up again. Her eyes traveled around the cabin, as if trying to understand where she was. Then they landed on me, studying my face in a way that made me feel strangely exposed. Not judged, not inspected, just seen. I wasn't used to that. Most people look at men like me and see a uniform, a job, a shadow passing by. But she looked at me like she was trying to understand the person behind the wheel. Minutes passed before she whispered a thank you. It was barely audible, the kind of thank you spoken by someone who has lost a piece of themselves and isn't sure what remains. I told her it was nothing, that anyone would have done the same. But deep down I doubted that. People don't stop as often as they should. People don't risk themselves for strangers anymore. Maybe that's why her eyes softened when I said it, maybe she knew it wasn't true. Her breathing steadied little by little, and the color in her cheeks returned. I asked if she was hurt, if she remembered what caused her to lose control of the car. She turned her head away, staring at the frost gathering along the edge of the windshield. She didn't answer. Something inside her tightened, like a door being shut from the inside. I recognized that silence. It was the same silence I carried in my own chest whenever someone asked about my past, my mistakes, my daughter. A silence filled with too much truth. I didn't push her. The snow continued falling, and the world outside the windows vanished behind a white curtain. There was no way to drive safely, not with the road turning into a slippery graveyard of black ice. I told her we needed to stay put until the storm eased. She nodded gently, as if she didn't care where she was, as long as the cold wasn't pulling her back into that frozen darkness. After a while, she shifted slightly, her head resting against the seat, her breathing more stable. She seemed calmer, but her eyes still carried a storm of their own. A storm deeper than the one outside. I wondered what had driven a woman like her to be alone, in the middle of nowhere, on Christmas Eve. People with wealth like hers don't travel without drivers or security. They don't disappear into dark roads without someone noticing. Unless they want to disappear. That thought lingered. She looked at me once again, this time with a softness that felt strangely familiar. Like she recognized something in me, pain recognizing pain, maybe. And then, in a fragile whisper, she asked me not to take her home yet. Not to call her family. Not to alert anyone. The request hit me like cold air to the lungs. Why wouldn't a woman like her want to be found? Before I could ask anything, the radio crackled. A breaking news alert burst through the speaker, talking about a missing billionaire, last seen earlier that evening, feared to be in danger. The report mentioned her name. Her face. Her company. And she was sitting right beside me. I turned slowly toward her. Her eyes met mine in a way that said everything without a single word. She knew she was the woman on the radio. She knew people were looking for her. She knew she should have been somewhere safe. But she wasn't. And she didn't want to be. The cabin felt smaller then, as if the truth itself had filled the space between us. I didn't know why she had run, why she had been alone, why she seemed more afraid of being found than of dying in the snow. But I knew one thing. This woman hadn't crossed my path by accident. And whatever she was running from, had just become part of my Christmas night. The storm eased just enough for the world outside to regain a vague shape, though everything remained blurred beneath a heavy curtain of falling snow. Inside the cabin, warmth slowly replaced the icy air, and the woman beside me seemed to regain control of her body even if her spirit remained somewhere far from safety. There was a tension in the way she sat, a quiet battle happening behind her stillness, as if she were trying to hold together pieces that refused to fit. The cabin felt too small for two strangers carrying different sorrows, yet it was the only space in the world where neither of us was expected to pretend. In a strange way, the silence between us felt familiar, as if pain recognized pain faster than any introduction ever could. As the engine hummed beneath us, my mind slipped into old memories the way tired men slip into warm blankets. I didn't want to think about Lily, because thinking about her always brought warmth followed by a sharp ache, but the thought came anyway. I pictured her as a little girl riding that second-hand bicycle I had spent hours repairing on a Christmas Eve years ago. I remembered how she laughed, wobbling across the small apartment parking lot, believing her father could fix anything. That memory still fought against the truth that came later, when the transport company closed, and my job disappeared overnight, taking with it the last bit of confidence I had in myself. Nothing breaks a man faster than watching his family slip away while he stands helpless on the outside. The woman beside me shifted slightly, drawing my attention back to the present. It was strange how she kept observing me with a quiet intensity, not judging, not comparing, just trying to understand. There was something in her eyes that reminded me of a traveler lost in a storm long before the snow arrived, someone who had been wandering through cold places inside her own life. I recognized that look because I had worn it too many times while pretending I was fine. She held my jacket around her shoulders with a careful grip, and in that simple gesture, I noticed the exhaustion woven into her movements. Not the exhaustion of a long night, but of a long life. Snow piled against the windshield, forming a thick border that made me feel as if we were trapped in a frozen globe someone kept shaking. The heater rattled softly, trying its best to push back the cold, and in that small pocket of warmth, my thoughts drifted again to the road that had led me here. I had spent so many years believing that people from her world lived untouched by hardship, that wealth built invisible walls nothing could penetrate. But sitting there, watching her stare out at the storm as if searching for something she had lost long before tonight, I understood that money doesn't protect anyone from loneliness, guilt, or regret. Those wounds travel freely between all kinds of people. I focused on the rhythm of her breathing, slow and uneven, as though she were still fighting the cold inside her bones. The faint glow from the dashboard cast soft lines across her face, revealing a vulnerability that didn't match the image of a powerful woman like the one described on the radio earlier. The announcement about the missing billionaire had echoed through the cabin like a warning, but she had only closed her eyes for a moment, neither surprised nor afraid. It was as if she expected to be spoken about like a problem to solve rather than a person to find. The contrast struck me deeply. People searched for her because of her money, her company, her image. But no one seemed to know the woman sitting quietly beside me, wrapped in a stranger's jacket on Christmas Eve. I let my gaze slide back to the road outside, though there was little to see. The world looked erased, and part of me wondered if that was how her life felt to her, bright on the surface, blank underneath. Something had driven her into that storm alone. Something powerful enough to make her leave behind the comfort anyone else would cling to. And though she hadn't said a word about it, the weight of that choice filled the cabin like an unspoken confession. A quiet understanding settled between us, the kind of understanding that comes when two people share the same darkness from different corners of the world. I didn't need her to speak for me to sense her fear, her heartbreak, her exhaustion. And she didn't need me to explain my own. Sometimes the most honest conversations happen without words, carried only by breath, posture, presence. I could feel her noticing the roughness of my hands, the scars across my knuckles, the tired determination written into the way I sat. In a way I couldn't quite explain, I felt exposed, but not in a painful sense. More like someone had finally turned a light toward the parts of me I always hid. The storm thickened again, tapping the windows with a rhythm that reminded me of long nights on the road when loneliness feels like a passenger. The sound made me reflect on how many times I had believed that my world was too small for anything extraordinary to ever reach me. I had accepted that my story was the story of a man who works hard, loses quietly, and continues moving because stopping hurts more than driving. But tonight disrupted that belief. And the woman wrapped in my jacket seemed like a sign that not all endings stay the same. Her breathing deepened, marking a calm I hadn't seen in her until now, and something inside me loosened. For a moment, it felt like the two of us were suspended between past and future, held in place by a storm neither of us had chosen. She leaned back against the seat with a stillness that told me her strength was slowly returning, but her heart remained scattered across some invisible battlefield. I wondered how long she had been carrying that weight. I wondered if anyone had ever noticed. The radio murmured again with static, bringing news of families celebrating Christmas across the region, describing lights, music, gatherings, warmth. The contrast cut through me like a cold blade, because none of that belonged to my reality, nor to hers, it seemed. We were two strangers escaping two different kinds of emptiness, finding shelter only because a storm forced us into the same small space. As her eyes drifted half-closed, I felt an unexpected pull towards something I couldn't name. Maybe it was the fragile way she held herself, or the recognition of a loneliness that mirrored mine, or the sense that fate had pushed us into each other's paths not by accident, but by necessity. Whatever it was, it settled deep in my chest, stirring something I hadn't felt in years. Something quiet but alive. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering everything it touched. Inside, we sat together in a silence that spoke more than any conversation could. And in that moment, I understood that the wounds she carried were far deeper than anything money could heal. And for the first time that night, I sensed that her presence in my truck was not the end of something, but the beginning of a truth neither of us was ready to face. The storm finally softened into a quiet snowfall that drifted lazily across the windshield, as if the sky had grown tired of shouting and now whispered instead. I eased the truck back onto the road, the tires crunching through fresh layers of white while the world settled into a hush that felt almost sacred. The woman beside me remained wrapped in my jacket, her posture steadier, her breath no longer trembling. Yet the weight around her hadn't lifted. It clung to her like frost clings to glass, impossible to ignore no matter how warm the cabin became. I kept my eyes on the road, but I could feel her gaze drifting toward me at times, as if trying to understand why a stranger had pulled her out of a frozen grave without asking anything in return. I didn't have an answer. Maybe I simply couldn't bear the thought of someone else being swallowed by the dark the way life had tried to swallow me. The highway stretched into a long ribbon of pale light, bordered by forests buried beneath snow. For a few minutes, the quiet felt almost peaceful, though beneath it ran a current of questions neither of us dared to touch. Her shoulders lifted with a slow, careful breath, and I sensed she was preparing to step back into the world, even if just with a thought. She sat straighter, taking in the fading turbulence of the night, and her presence filled the cabin with a strange energy that made the space feel different. As if her strength was returning piece by fragile piece, and with it came something sharper, something determined. The radio had already revealed her identity, but she hadn't acknowledged it in words. She didn't need to. I had recognized the name instantly when it echoed through the static. Victoria Hale. The woman whose family owned an empire large enough to cast shadows across towns, businesses, and lives far removed from their world. Including mine. I felt an old burn ignite in my chest, a memory of the day my former company shut down after losing a major contract. A contract swallowed by the very corporation her family controlled. That collapse had been the first domino in a chain that destroyed my job, my home, and eventually the family I tried so hard to hold together. I hadn't thought of that day in months, maybe years, but now the memory pressed against my ribs as if waking from a long sleep. I didn't resent her personally. She hadn't been the one to sign those papers or make those decisions. But the name Hale had always carried a sting, and now that name sat inches away from me, wrapped in my jacket, breathing the warm air of my truck. The contradiction twisted inside me in ways I couldn't explain. Still, I kept driving, because no matter what pain her world had caused mine, the woman beside me was simply human tonight. A human who needed warmth, safety, and a direction to walk toward. When we reached a small fuel station near the outskirts of a forgotten town, I pulled over under the shelter of the dim canopy. Light flickered from an old neon sign, painting the snow with a restless glow. The place was nearly empty, just a few trucks parked like tired beasts resting from long journeys. I turned off the engine, and the sudden silence settled heavily between us. She took a slow breath and stepped out of the truck with a steadiness that surprised me, though her movements still carried the softness of someone recovering from something deeper than cold. Inside the convenience store, the heat wrapped around us in a wave of artificial warmth. Coffee machines hummed, refrigerators buzzed, and the faint music playing overhead felt almost out of place against the weight of the night. She looked around with an expression that blended curiosity and discomfort, as if she had stepped into a world she had never truly touched before. I bought 2 coffees, not thinking much of it, just doing what I knew simple actions meant to keep the body moving when the heart feels heavy. When I handed her the cup, her fingers brushed mine with a kind of hesitation that carried gratitude and caution at the same time. She walked slowly toward a small table in the corner of the shop, choosing a seat far from the windows, as if she wanted to hide from the world outside. I sat across from her, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The air between us felt thick with truths neither of us were ready to acknowledge. She held the cup with both hands, letting the heat seep into her palms, and her eyes lifted toward me with a softness that carried exhaustion, vulnerability, and something that looked like resolve. There was a shift in her posture, a gathering of courage, the kind that comes not from strength but from the fear of living another day without answers. She leaned forward slightly, as if trying to step out of her own life for a moment and into the space between us. Her breathing steadied, and the words she crafted silently behind her gaze were not the kind that belonged to a woman running from paparazzi or publicity. They were the kind that belonged to someone running from truth. I sensed she was about to ask something impossible long before she lowered her eyes and steadied her hands. There was a stillness around her as if the world had paused to listen. And then, in a single breath, her expression shifted into something that held plea and determination in equal measure. She wanted me to take her somewhere. Not home. Not to her family. Not to the authorities looking for her. She wanted to be taken to a private house her family used for gatherings on holidays, a house high in the hills, far from the noise of the city. She wanted to arrive without being seen by security, assistants, or anyone who worked for her or her father. She wanted to step into her world not as Victoria Hale, the heir of an empire, but as a woman returning to a battlefield she could no longer avoid. And beneath her request was something more fragile. She wanted me to stay by her side while she faced whatever waited behind those walls. The absurdity of it washed over me in a heavy wave. A billionaire hiding in a truck, asking a man like me to be the one person at her side when she stepped into a house built on secrets. She didn't offer money at first. Instead, she offered sincerity, the kind that comes only when someone is desperate enough to finally reveal the truth behind their strength. She wanted to confront something inside that house, something tied to her family, something tied to the very choices that once destroyed the life I had built. When she finally spoke through her posture, her lowered gaze, her trembling breath, I understood the weight of what she was asking. She didn't want transportation. She wanted courage, borrowed courage, because hers had been chipped away by years of silent battles. And as strange as it seemed, she believed I could give her that. The storm quieted outside the windows, the lights flickered slightly, and the world seemed to lean in as if waiting for my answer. I didn't know why fate had placed her in my path. I didn't know why she saw something in me that made her trust me on the most vulnerable night of her life. But I knew this much: sometimes the road offers choices that reshape the stories we believe we are trapped in. And sometimes those choices come dressed not as opportunities, but as wounded strangers asking for help at the edge of the night. As I met her gaze across the small table, I felt the weight of everything shifting around us, and I knew the quiet part of my life was ending. What waited ahead wasn't just a house in the hills. It was the truth neither of us had been ready to face. The drive toward the hills felt different from any stretch of road I had traveled that night. The storm had weakened to a soft snowfall, the kind that drifts slowly through the air like feathers released from an unseen hand. The sky above us remained heavy and low, but something in the atmosphere had shifted, as if the world itself were holding its breath while I carried a woman from a world far beyond mine into a place she feared more than the frozen highway where I found her. Victoria sat quietly beside me, her gaze fixed on the blurred scenery passing by. The jacket I had given her still hung around her shoulders, and though color had returned to her face, there was a distant tremor in the way she held herself, as if every mile we climbed brought her closer to a truth she had spent years avoiding. The hills rose around us like dark silhouettes cutting into the snow-filled sky. Tall pines lined the narrow road, their branches heavy and glistening with frost. Christmas lights twinkled faintly from distant homes scattered across the slopes, warm pockets of life tucked into the cold landscape. My chest tightened with the same familiar ache that always found me this time of year. Families gathering. Tables set. Fireplaces glowing. And me, a spectator to lives I could never touch. As we reached the final curve, the Hale estate revealed itself through the trees, glowing with golden light and wrapped in garlands that shimmered under the falling snow. The house wasn't just large, it was the kind of place people only see in magazines or movie scenes. Wide stone steps led to tall doors framed by wreaths, and every window spilled warm light onto the white ground. A line of expensive cars rested along the driveway, polished enough to reflect the lights above them. The contrast struck me like a punch. My world was metal, grease, and endless highways. Hers was crystal chandeliers and silent hallways where footsteps echoed like secrets. I parked the truck far from the main entrance, hidden behind a cluster of fir trees. The engine's rumble faded into silence. Victoria hesitated before opening her door, her breath forming a pale cloud in the air as she looked toward the house. The weight of something unspoken pressed on her shoulders. I sensed she wasn't only returning to a family gathering. She was returning to a battlefield, one built not of violence, but of expectations and buried truths. We walked through the snow, our steps muffled by the thick white carpet beneath us. The closer we got, the more I felt my presence shrinking under the grandeur of the place. I had no business being there, no place among these walls. But she walked just a little behind me, as if the only footing she trusted at that moment was the path I made ahead of her. That thought unsettled me in ways I couldn't name. When we stepped into the foyer, warmth washed over us instantly. The smell of cinnamon, pine, and roasted ham filled the air, blending into a holiday richness that felt almost unreal after the night we had just survived. People dressed in tailored clothes moved gracefully through the decorated hall, holding crystal glasses filled with ruby-colored drinks. Laughter floated through the air, accompanied by soft classical music that drifted from deeper in the house. It was a world untouched by cold or fear, polished and bright. But the moment people noticed Victoria, the room changed. Conversation stopped in mid-sentence. Eyes widened, some in relief, others in alarm. A few hurried toward her with outstretched arms while others whispered behind their hands, studying me with confusion, suspicion, or judgment. I felt the familiar sting of being out of place, of being measured against standards I never had the chance to reach. But she moved closer to me, not away, as if my presence anchored her in a room built on facades. She walked through her family's Christmas gathering with the quiet defiance of someone carrying more truth than anyone there wanted to hear. People thanked me for saving her, some with warmth, others with distant politeness. Their smiles didn't reach their eyes. Their gratitude cracked under the pressure of their discomfort. I stood tall but silent, aware of every wrinkle in my jacket, every scrape on my boots, every piece of my life that didn't belong in that polished world. As we moved deeper into the house, I caught fragments of murmured conversations. Words like irresponsible, dangerous, and publicity risk drifted through the air like sharp snowflakes. None of them seemed to notice that she was made of fragility that night, not scandal. But people rarely see beyond their own reflections. The dining hall was enormous, the long table dressed with candles, crystal, gold-trimmed plates, and dishes that looked too perfect to eat. The family members sat in groups, their connections folding and unfolding like delicate threads of power and resentment. Victoria's arrival drew silence across the table, but beneath that silence I sensed the tension of a storm gathering, not outside in the hills, but behind the eyes of the people closest to her. I felt small, out of place, almost like a ghost watching a life that would never include me. My phone vibrated with a message, and for a moment my chest tightened with worry. Lily. It was a photo sent by her grandmother of my daughter holding a sparkler outside on their porch. Her smile shone through the cold night, though something inside her eyes looked a little lonely, as if she was waiting for me even if she pretended not to. The distance between us felt heavier than ever. Being inside a mansion didn't make me feel higher, it made me feel further from everything that truly mattered. As I tried to slip away quietly, a conversation near the window caught my attention. Two men in tailored suits whispered about company decisions, profit losses, and strategies to recover public trust. Their words sharpened as they mentioned the collapse of several small transport businesses years ago, businesses crushed by a decision made by the Hale Empire, a decision orchestrated by Victoria's father. A decision that had started the unraveling of my own life. The air thinned around me. The table, the lights, the polished silverware, all of it blurred as the realization settled. The woman I had saved, the woman who trusted me enough to bring her here, belonged to the very family whose choices had broken mine. Not metaphorically. Literally. My life had been pushed off its path because of decisions made behind doors just like these. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, loud enough to drown the music playing in the hall. And as I turned my eyes toward Victoria, I sensed she already knew. Her posture stiffened for a fraction of a second, a small but unmistakable flinch. She knew the truth trapped between our worlds. She knew and had brought me here anyway, perhaps because she was no longer running from cold or fear, but from the weight of everything that connected us in ways neither of us had understood. The room grew quieter. The air heavier. And just like that, Christmas Eve became something else entirely. A collision course between past wounds and the truth waiting in the next breath. The voices in the grand dining hall blurred into a distant hum as the truth settled in my chest like a stone dropped into deep water. Every breath felt heavier, every heartbeat echoing with the realization that the downfall of my old life, the job I lost, the debts that drowned me, the strain that pushed my family into fracture, had begun in this very house, built by the hands of the man whose daughter now stood inches from me, wrapped in my jacket and carrying more sorrow than I had first understood. I looked at the room again, at the chandeliers glowing above us like frozen stars, at the polished silver that reflected faces filled with secrets, and I felt an unfamiliar heat rising in my throat. I had walked into a world that had barely noticed when mine collapsed, and now that world stared back at me as though I didn't exist. I stepped away from the table, away from the music and the murmurs, needing distance, air, anything that quieted the pressure growing inside my ribs. The hallway was dim and long, lined with portraits of ancestors who stared down as if guarding the lineage of wealth and power built over generations. Their eyes followed me, or at least that's how it felt, reminding me I had no place there. I kept walking until the sound of celebration faded completely and the house fell into a quieter darkness, lit only by a few golden sconces. I leaned against the wall, feeling the coldness of stone seep through my shirt, grounding me as my thoughts spiraled. I had not blamed anyone in years. Life had taught me that blame was a luxury, something men like me could not afford because it wasn't blame that paid bills, or repaired marriages, or filled empty refrigerators. But standing there, surrounded by the very walls where decisions were made that crushed people who would never be invited inside, something old and raw surfaced inside me. The memory of the day my supervisor told us the company had lost its biggest contract, how he avoided meeting our eyes while explaining that trucks would be seized, routes canceled, jobs erased. The helplessness of going home and pretending to be strong for a little girl who sensed everything even when she said nothing. I had buried that anger. And now it rose again, uninvited. Footsteps approached, soft, hesitant, familiar. Victoria appeared at the end of the hallway, illuminated by the warm glow behind her. She moved slowly, as if each step cost her something invisible. There was no glamour now, no shield of confidence or inherited prestige. Just a woman searching for a place where she could breathe. She reached the empty space where I stood, and in the quiet that settled between us, I understood she already knew why I had walked away. Her eyes lowered slightly, not in shame, but in acknowledgement of a truth neither of us could ignore anymore. She clasped her hands together, nervously, as if preparing to offer a confession she had held inside for too long. Her breath trembled, and though no words passed between us, everything she wanted to say settled in the space like a fragile glass ornament. She knew. She had known for some time that her father's company had crushed smaller businesses, that numbers on paper had become losses in real lives, that families like mine had paid the hidden price of decisions made in pristine conference rooms far above the reach of ordinary people. She had known, and it had torn something inside her. The silence carried her confession more clearly than any sentence could. I turned my face away for a moment, not because I was angry at her, but because something inside me had cracked open and the hurt was too raw to let her see. She stepped closer, not invading my space, but bridging the distance with a quiet courage that surprised me. Her presence felt like an apology wrapped in human form, fragile and trembling, but honest in a way that pierced through the walls I had built around myself. Images of my old life passed through my mind, the nights I came home exhausted, the way my daughter clung to my leg when she sensed worry in my voice, the moment I realized my marriage was slipping away because stress had carved too many lines into my face. I felt the collapse of years compressed into one moment, standing there with a woman who carried the same sorrow from the other side of the divide. Two worlds separated by wealth but united by hurt. She looked up then, her eyes shimmering with something more than grief. It was vulnerability, the kind that comes when the truth becomes too heavy to carry alone. I felt the shift in her posture, the way she inhaled as if gathering the courage to step into the open. And then, with a subtle motion that needed no explanation, she shared the truth she had kept hidden. She had been on that road earlier not because she was running from paparazzi, not because she wanted silence or escape, but because she had discovered the full extent of what her father had done. She had finally grasped the lives shattered under decisions made in rooms like this one, and it had broken something inside her so deeply that she didn't know how to face Christmas surrounded by everything those decisions built. She had been driving alone in the snow because she didn't know where she fit anymore, between loyalty and conscience, between privilege and humanity, between her world and mine. The confession washed over me, not as an excuse, but as a truth that reshaped the night. She wasn't just a woman from a wealthy family. She was someone caught in a storm she didn't know how to escape, someone whose heart was cracking open for the first time under the weight of her family's legacy. And standing there in the quiet hallway, I felt something unexpected, a softening of the anger inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet. But understanding. The walls around us seemed to breathe again, and the house no longer felt like an enemy, just a place where too many secrets had slept for too long. She stepped closer, her presence trembling, as if waiting for me to walk away and leave her drowning in the truth she finally dared to face. But I didn't move. Something in her eyes held me there, something real and painfully human. And then my phone vibrated. The sound sliced through the air like a sudden alarm. A cold rush spread across my chest as I pulled it from my pocket, expecting perhaps a holiday message or a reminder of my route. But the screen showed a missed call from a number I knew too well, a hospital in the city where my daughter was staying. A voicemail flashed beneath it. My breath stalled. The world shrank. I opened the message, and the words inside delivered a shock that raced through every part of me. Lily had been taken to the emergency room. Her breathing had worsened. They needed me there. The hallway spun for a moment. The anger, the truth, the mansion, the storm, all of it faded into a single instinct that roared inside me with the force of every mile I had ever driven. My daughter needed me. And nothing else mattered. The moment I heard the hospital's message, everything inside me shifted as if the world had tilted on its axis. The hallway, the golden lights, the polished floors, the portraits staring down from the walls, all of it dissolved into a blur swallowed by one truth. My daughter was fighting to breathe, and I wasn't by her side. A cold wave surged through my chest, harsher than any winter storm, pushing out every thought except the desperate need to reach her. My hands shook as I closed the phone, and my breath became uneven, caught between panic and guilt. For a second I couldn't move, couldn't think, as if my body refused to accept that I had allowed myself to be anywhere but near Lily on Christmas Eve. Victoria saw it. She didn't need words to understand. Something in the way I froze, in the way my shoulders caved inward, told her everything. Her face softened, losing the tension and fear she had carried into the house, replaced by something sharper and clearer, concern. Real concern, not the polished kind people in her world used to maintain appearances. Her expression held a kind of vulnerability I had seen only once before, when she was half-conscious in the freezing snow, and it struck me that she knew what it meant to fear for someone you loved yet could not protect. The air grew still around us. She stepped closer, her presence grounding me when my thoughts threatened to scatter into 100 pieces. For a moment I felt the weight of the night pressing down on me, the truth about her family, the truth about what her world had done to mine, the truth that my daughter was hurting and I was miles away trapped in a mansion that had never been built for men like me. The ache rose so fast it nearly stole my breath. I needed to run, to drive, to tear through the snow until nothing stood between me and Lily. I turned toward the exit, ready to leave everything behind, but Victoria reached out gently, her hand barely grazing my arm. It wasn't a gesture meant to stop me, she knew nothing could. It was a gesture meant to steady me. And in that fragile moment, something inside her shifted too, as if she understood that all the wealth in her world meant nothing if it couldn't save the heart of a man who had saved her life. Without waiting for me to speak, she moved with sudden determination, crossing the hallway with quick, purposeful steps. The strength in her posture returned, not the cold, polished strength of privilege, but the fierce, trembling strength of someone who refuses to stand still when a life is at stake. She disappeared briefly into the nearest room, where murmured voices and clinking glasses had carried on, unaware of the storm unfolding in the hallway. Moments later she re-emerged, followed by a man who seemed startled by whatever she had just told him. He nodded, hurried away, and she returned to me with a clarity in her eyes that cut through my rising panic. She gestured for me to follow her, and though I didn't understand, something in her urgency kept me from questioning. We stepped outside into the cold again, the wind slicing across my face with a reminder of the world beyond walls of luxury. Snowflakes spiraled in the air, soft but relentless, covering the steps and driveways in a fresh layer of white. Victoria led me toward a side path where a sleek vehicle waited under a sheltered awning, its engine already running, lights glowing like small beacons in the darkness. She turned toward me with a steadiness that startled me. She was offering more than transportation, she was offering speed, access, possibility. She was offering the kind of help no one had ever offered me before. I felt pride rise like a barrier inside my chest, the old reflex of a man who had learned to survive by refusing to depend on anyone. But pride is useless when a child is fighting for breath. Pride doesn't open doors. Pride doesn't shorten roads. Pride doesn't save lives. And she seemed to understand that instinctively. We got into the vehicle, the interior warm and quiet, and as soon as the doors closed, the driver accelerated with a smoothness that contrasted sharply with the raw chaos inside my mind. The mansion's lights blurred behind us as we sped down the icy road. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, trying to hold myself together, trying to swallow the fear that threatened to swallow me whole. My thoughts raced with images of Lily, her small hands gripping mine, her laughter on summer afternoons, her eyes searching for me every time I left for another long route. I had missed too many moments already. The guilt pressed on my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. Victoria sat beside me, silent but present, her breath unsteady in the dim interior. I realized she wasn't just helping me reach my daughter, she was clinging to something inside the moment too, as if saving Lily meant saving a part of herself that had been buried behind years of cold decisions she hadn't made but had inherited. Maybe she needed redemption as much as I needed hope. City lights began to glow through the snow, faint at first, then brighter as we approached the skyline. My heart pounded faster with every intersection, every turn. Hospitals always smell the same, like antiseptic and urgency, and the memory alone tightened my throat. When we finally arrived, I stepped out before the car had fully stopped, my boots sliding slightly on the icy pavement as I hurried toward the entrance. The sliding doors opened with a sharp hiss, releasing a blast of warm air that carried the sound of hurried footsteps and distant monitors. Victoria followed close behind, not intruding, not leading, just being there, as though she had fastened her resolve to mine. Inside, the lights were too bright, the floors too clean, the air too still. I approached the reception desk with a heart heavy enough to break my ribs. The nurse recognized my daughter's name instantly. She spoke with calm professionalism, but her words blurred into a fog of medical terms and reassurance. Only 2 words carved themselves clearly into my mind: stable now. Stable. Now. Relief hit me so fast my legs nearly gave out. I exhaled a breath I had been holding since the hallway in the Hale mansion, and the ache inside me broke open into something rawer, deeper, too full to name. The nurse guided me down a corridor toward Lily's room. The walls felt narrower with each step, and my heart beat like a drum inside my chest. When I entered the room, the smallest figure in the world lay curled under white sheets. Her chest rose and fell with the rhythm of a child climbing back toward strength, but her face looked tired, pale, tender. A small oxygen tube rested beneath her nose. Machines hummed softly beside her. And yet, even in that fragile state, she opened her eyes as if she had felt me arrive through the walls. The way she looked at me broke something inside me and healed another part at the same time. Her eyes softened, her lips parted, and a faint warmth spread across her expression, as if my presence alone had given her body permission to rest. Behind me, Victoria paused in the doorway, her silhouette framed by weak fluorescent light. She looked at Lily not with pity, but with a gentleness that didn't belong to the woman the world believed her to be. That gesture alone made the room feel warmer. And then something happened that I never expected. Victoria slipped off a delicate ring from her finger, a ring far too expensive for a man like me to recognize but humble in the meaning she gave it. She walked to the edge of the bed with slow, almost reverent steps. She placed the ring gently into Lily's small hand, closing the tiny fingers around it with a tenderness that defied the snowy, harsh night we had endured. Her eyes softened with something like apology and hope blended together, as if she wished she could erase all the distance life had built between my world and hers. My daughter held the ring weakly, studying the golden curve through heavy eyelids, then looked up at me with a quiet innocence that made my chest tighten even more. In that soft gaze, I saw a question not about the ring, but about the woman who had walked into our lives like a storm and a shelter at the same time. And in Lily's faint, sleepy voice, barely above a whisper, she formed a single thought that marked the night forever. She wanted to know if the kind lady would stay with us for Christmas too. The hospital room felt warmer after Lily's question drifted through the air, fragile and soft, as if her small voice carried a hope neither the night nor the cold could dim. She looked at Victoria with a sleepy mix of curiosity and trust, the kind of trust only a child can offer so easily, without knowing the complexities surrounding the adults standing at her bedside. Victoria froze for a moment, her posture tightening as though she wasn't sure she deserved such innocence. Then something in her expression softened, melting the distance she had carried since the moment I found her on the frozen road. She didn't answer out loud, but the quiet warmth in her eyes made clear that Lily's question had reached her in a place deeper than words. I watched them, feeling a strange blend of gratitude and unsettled confusion in my chest. My daughter, lying in a hospital bed with oxygen tubes and soft blankets, had managed to pull something human and tender out of a woman whose world was built on cold corridors of power and responsibility. The sight stirred something inside me, something fragile, something I didn't want to name yet. The world outside the window remained buried under white snow, a city wrapped in stillness, but inside that hospital room a small spark flickered to life, the kind that refuses to fade even in the darkest winters. After speaking briefly with the nurse, I learned Lily would need to remain under observation through the night. Relief washed through me again, heavier this time, like a warm tide rising slowly against the chill I had carried for hours. She was safe. She was recovering. And I had made it in time, even if the guilt of not being closer sooner carved deeper lines into my heart. Victoria remained near the doorway for a long moment, watching us in silence. There was something in her stance, a mix of longing and hesitance, that made me wonder if she had ever stood beside a bed like this one, heart tight with worry, love spilling over into fear. Her world was full of people, yet I sensed she had been alone for far too long. It was strange to feel that loneliness echoing in her presence, blending with my own. When the nurse said I needed to rest because Lily required calm and quiet, I nodded weakly. My legs felt unsteady, my body drained from panic, cold, tension, and the long night unfolding like a story I had never imagined living. Victoria stepped out of the room before me, giving Lily one last look, a look filled with unspoken promises, regret, and something close to admiration. My daughter had offered her what the entire mansion full of people had not, honesty. We walked down the corridor together, both exhausted, both heavy with the shadows of our own lives. The fluorescent lights flickered above us, casting long reflections on the polished floor. The night outside was deep and silent, the snow still falling in gentle waves. Instead of returning to the car, Victoria paused near the large windows at the end of the hallway. She stared at the white cityscape, her breath slow, her posture tense. Something inside her was unraveling, and I could feel it even before she turned her head slightly toward me. There was no script for what came next. No plan. No logic tying our paths together except the strange force that had already pulled us through storms, revelations, and fears. When she finally spoke into the quiet, not with words, but with her presence leaning toward mine, I felt the heaviness behind her once polished exterior. It was the weight of someone trying to carry too much alone. And maybe because I was so raw myself, so stripped down by fear and love and exhaustion, I didn't step away when she moved a little closer. I didn't retreat from the warmth she offered in that fragile moment. There, in the dim hospital hallway, we became two human beings without titles, without pasts crashing into each other, without the definitions that separated us. The boundaries between worlds faded like fog against glass. She suggested, in a quiet, almost uncertain gesture, that I should have somewhere warm to rest until morning. Not the cold truck. Not a stiff plastic chair by Lily's bed. Something more human than both. She didn't say the words, but her intention unfolded in the way she held herself, steady, gentle, offering without demanding. And I, too tired to resist the humanity in her, nodded. We stepped back into the cold night, though the snowfall had softened. The city lights reflected in the thin layer of ice along the streets, creating a delicate shimmer that made the world look touched by something holy. The car driver opened the door, but this time Victoria's presence felt different beside me, less like a stranger from a distant world and more like someone walking with me through a night that was shaping both our lives. She chose not to return to the mansion. Instead, she asked to stop at a small hotel near the hospital, far simpler than the places her world usually touched, yet warm enough, private enough, real enough. We walked into the modest lobby, the scent of coffee drifting faintly through the air, and for a moment it felt like stepping into a quieter universe. I didn't want luxury or comfort. I only wanted something soft enough to catch the exhaustion pulling at my bones. The room was simple, with a small couch and a bed spread with crisp white sheets. Soft yellow lights reflected off the pale walls, giving the space a gentle glow. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands covering my face as the tension I'd held for hours finally cracked open. I felt the fear I had suppressed, the guilt of not being close enough when Lily needed me, the confusion of having a woman like Victoria stepping into my life with unexpected care. Victoria sat on the small couch near the window, her eyes following the movement of snowflakes drifting past the glass. She looked nothing like the woman painted by newspapers or surrounded by luxury earlier that night. She looked human, quiet, tired, vulnerable, and searching for something real. In that soft light, she seemed warmer than the expensive ornaments displayed in her family's mansion. She seemed like someone who had finally stepped out of her own shadow. For the first time since I found her on the side of the road, she let her guard fall completely. She confessed, not with speeches, but with the steady tremble of her breath, that she had spent too many years hiding behind success and expectations, losing parts of herself in places where affection couldn't grow. She stared at the small space around us as though feeling something she hadn't felt in years: simplicity. Safety. The presence of someone who wanted nothing from her except honesty. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Exhaustion became its own language, filling the silence like a warm blanket. For a long moment, we simply existed in the same space, breathing the same quiet air, letting the night settle around us like a second skin. Outside, snowflakes glowed beneath street lamps, drifting as softly as memories. When sleep finally reached me, it came not with chaos, but with a rare sense of peace, the kind that grows only in the presence of truth, fear, love, and unexpected tenderness blending together. The world outside remained buried under winter, but inside that small room, far from wealth, far from old wounds, far from storms, something warm flickered like a fragile flame refusing to die. And for the first time in many years, I fell asleep believing that Christmas might still hold light for people like me. Morning arrived quietly, with soft daylight slipping through the thin curtains of the small hotel room like a gentle reminder that the world continues even when our hearts tremble. I woke before the sun fully climbed the sky, the heaviness of the night still pressing on my chest, though softened by the warmth of knowing Lily was just a short walk away. My limbs felt stiff, my eyes burning with the kind of exhaustion that reaches the soul, yet my first breath carried relief instead of panic. The fear that had consumed me through the night had loosened its grip, and in its place remained something fragile, something hopeful. Victoria was still asleep on the small couch, curled slightly under a blanket the receptionist had brought up without us asking. Her hair fell across her cheek, and in the quiet morning light she looked nothing like the woman her world expected her to be. Gone were the barriers she carried through the mansion, gone were the layers of guarded pride. She looked like someone rediscovering the simple truth of being human. No cameras, no shareholders, no cold expectations, just a woman in a quiet room after a long night of facing what she could no longer run from. I watched her breathe for a moment, not out of admiration, but out of respect for the weight she had carried and the strength she had shown. Last night, she didn't hesitate when my world crumbled. She didn't hide behind wealth or fear. She simply acted with a sincerity that revealed who she truly was beneath the image built for her. That sincerity had begun to carve a small space inside me, one I didn't know existed anymore. I stood up quietly, stretching my sore muscles, and prepared myself to return to the hospital. When she finally stirred awake, blinking softly as if piecing her thoughts together, there was an ease in her expression I hadn't seen since the moment I pulled her from the snow. She straightened slowly, the blanket slipping from her shoulders, and our eyes met with a shared understanding that the night had changed something between us, something neither of us had expected nor planned. We didn't speak about it. We didn't need to. The quiet morning carried the truth gently, like snow resting on pine branches. We returned to the hospital together. The corridors felt warmer in the morning light, and the tension that had pressed into every corner of my chest last night dissolved into relief the second I saw Lily sitting up, a soft blanket wrapped around her shoulders, a faint color returning to her cheeks. Her eyes brightened the moment she saw me, and in that instant the world aligned into something simple again. She reached for me, and I held her gently, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair mixed with the sterile hospital air. There is no language strong enough to express what it means to hold your child after almost losing them. It is a kind of gratitude that fills the ribs with trembling warmth. Victoria stayed near the doorway, giving us space but watching with eyes that softened each time Lily's small arms curled around me. That softness wasn't pity. It wasn't curiosity. It was something deeper, recognition. Perhaps she saw in us the family she had lost in quiet ways over the years, the connection money could never repair. Perhaps she envied the simplicity of our bond, or perhaps she longed for it. Whatever it was, she watched us with a tenderness so real it disturbed something in my chest. Lily insisted that Victoria come closer. She held out the ring Victoria had given her, gripping it as if it were a small treasure, and her childlike innocence wrapped the moment in grace. Seeing her tiny fingers curl around that symbol of apology and hope, I felt something shift again, something I wasn't prepared to face. I wasn't ready to open my heart to the woman who belonged to the world that once crushed mine. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a thin line of possibility stretched across the divide. The doctor soon confirmed that Lily could be discharged later that day. Her breathing had stabilized, the medication was working, and the crisis had passed. Relief flooded me once again, though a quiet guilt remained, reminding me that I had spent too many Christmases far from her, too many nights trusting the road to provide what only presence could give. When we left the hospital, the world looked different. The sun peeked through thick clouds, painting the snow-covered streets in a pale golden glow that felt almost sacred. Victoria suggested we find something small to eat, something warm, something simple. I didn't know why I agreed. Maybe because Lily held her hand. Maybe because the morning felt softer than the night before. Maybe because the storm inside me was beginning to thaw. We ended up in a tiny bakery near the hospital, the kind where the scent of fresh bread and chocolate melts into the walls. Christmas decorations hung from the ceiling, but they weren't luxurious or perfectly arranged, they were handmade by local kids, a little crooked, full of life. Lily's eyes sparkled at the sight of them, and for a moment the three of us stood there as if we had stepped into a different kind of world, one untouched by broken contracts, expectations, cold mansions, or lonely highways. We sat at a small wooden table near the window. As Lily nibbled on a pastry, crumbs scattering across the plate, something inside me softened enough to let the past settle without burning. Victoria watched her with quiet awe, as though witnessing a beauty she had forgotten existed, a child being simply a child. The contrast between this warm little bakery and the mansion from the night before became a revelation for her. Wealth had given her everything except the things worth keeping. Her gaze eventually lifted to mine. There was no request in her eyes, no expectation, no attempt to erase the past. What I saw instead was a question not about romance or forgiveness, but about possibility. A possibility that maybe people from opposite worlds could meet in the middle if they carried enough truth in their hands. The bakery hummed softly with holiday whispers, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something stirred deep within me, something close to peace. Not a perfect peace, not a storybook ending, but the kind of peace that comes when you realize the world offers second chances not wrapped in perfection but in imperfection shaped into hope. When we stepped outside again, snowflakes drifted gently around us. Lily slipped her small hand into mine, then reached out with her other hand to hold Victoria's. Watching them walk together across the snowy sidewalk, I felt my heart pull in a direction I had never expected. Victoria glanced at me, a faint, grateful smile softening her features, and for a moment the world fell quiet again. The improbable had happened. Not because a billionaire had crossed paths with a truck driver. Not because fate had thrown us into a storm together. Not even because the night had woven our lives into something neither of us understood fully yet. The improbable happened because Christmas, in its quiet, stubborn way, had reached into two broken lives and lit a light from within, a light that refused to go out. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if our worlds could truly blend, or if the night had simply given us a moment of truth before reality would pull us apart again. But as we walked through the snow, with Lily between us and the cold softening into warmth, I realized something for the first time in years. Maybe Christmas wasn't about miracles appearing out of nowhere. Maybe it was about recognizing the light we had convinced ourselves we no longer deserved. And on that Christmas night, a truck driver and a billionaire stood under a sky of falling snow, not as symbols of different worlds, but as two human hearts finally brave enough to hope again.